Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm here with my friend, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, Dee Piers. Hello, Dee. How are you tonight? I think Dee is keeping her microphone closed because some of her dogs are very active right now, but she is indeed here. Okay, and we're going to begin this by sharing on Facebook. But before we do, here are the topics we're covering tonight. Okay, first of all, BRICS and the Russian commitment to it. Second, the state of the U.S. and Yemen conflict in the Red Sea. Maybe I should have said the sad state, but that depends on your point of view, of course. So, okay, our third topic is how the Iran talks are going. That is, talks between Iran and the United States. Then we'll be dealing with the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan in context. And our final topic is what Scott Ritter has to say on the Ukrainian situation and the failure of the United States to bring peace, to Ukraine. So that's the show for tonight. I hope you'll stay for the whole thing. We'll have a lot of great stuff in it. But first thing we're going to do is share on Facebook. So if you'll give me a moment to do that, it won't take very long. Never takes very long to do that. Okay, that does it, I think. Now we'll move to the first of the articles we're going to go over for tonight. And that's an article by Larry Johnson, and it's on Russia's commitment to BRICS. The title of it is Russia's Commitment to BRICS is Firm, and talks with the U.S. is set for later this week. There was a live stream on RT on this topic. It dealt with Lavrov at the BRICS summit. We're not going to play that, but just read the article and comment on it, of course. While Russia continues to keep the door open for talks with Donald Trump, it is also focused on developing BRICS as an alternative to the U.S.-controlled international finance system. At the BRICS foreign ministers meeting held in Rio de Janeiro on April 28, 2025, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov emphasized several key themes reflecting Russia's strategic priorities within the bloc, that is, within BRICS. 1. Advocacy for a multipolar world order. Lavrov portrayed BRICS as a platform promoting a multipolar global system, challenging the dominance of the West. He criticized the United States for employing trade as a tool of coercion and for attempting to impede the emergence of new power centers. Sergei Lavrov asserted that BRICS represents, quote, an association where the principles of equal cooperation are actually implemented, unquote, appealing to nations seeking alternatives to Western-led institutions. I have to comment on this first one just to say I am really so ashamed that it's the Chinese and the Russians and other BRICS members who are pushing the idea of equal cooperation within the international system. I'm so ashamed that it is other nations that are leading the way on that, and that it is the United States that, for the sake of maintaining its own power, seems committed to conflict inside the international system, okay, and not to cooperation. You would think that the supposed leader of the democratic nations would be for collaboration and for peace. That's what we always learned when it came to democracy. And here we have other nations with a deficit, okay, in the democracy area. And they are leading the way on this, as opposed to the so-called leader of the democratic countries. This is something for us as a nation to be ashamed of. I can't believe things have gone, okay, in this way. It represents a total failure of leadership here in the United States, and it represents a failure of the people also. It can not only be blamed on our leaders, and the reason why it can't be is because we voted for them. Okay, of course, I know all about the two-party system and the corruption of the two-party system by big money. But it's the population of the United States that has allowed that by voting for big money candidates over the years and all the time. There's another way this could have gone. And the population, our population, the US population, wasn't sufficiently active to stop the trend away from democracy here. It is we, as a people, who have created the conditions that have allowed, okay, a small minority to wield power here in the United States. That is terrible. Anyway, moving on to the second point that was made by Sergei Lavrov. De-dollarization and financial sovereignty. Highlighting the shift away from the US dollar, Lavrov noted that approximately 65% of Russia's trades with BRICS countries is now conducted in national currencies. It is certainly a measure of the progress of de-dollarization. Going on, he mentioned ongoing efforts to develop alternative payment systems and platforms to reduce reliance on Western-controlled financial mechanisms such as the SWIFT system. 3, expansion, of BRICS membership. Lavrov discussed the bloc's openness to expanding its membership, referencing the creation of a, quote, partner country, unquote, category to include emerging economies aligned with BRICS values. He emphasized that this move is not about isolation, but about building inclusive partnerships. And that partner category has resulted in the very quick expansion, of BRICS in 2024 and 2025. 4, economic cooperation and development initiatives. He announced plans for establishing a BRICS development bank aimed at financing infrastructure and sustainable development projects within member countries. Lavrov also stressed the importance of embracing digital technologies to enhance trade, services, and innovation across the bloc. About that 4th item, I have to say, I thought there was already a BRICS development bank. I think it's known as the New Development Bank. So I don't quite understand what Sergei is talking about here. 5th, Lavrov reiterated the need to reform international institutions like the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund to better reflect the current geopolitical landscape and address the needs of developing nations. He argued that such reforms are essential for creating a more just and equitable world order. Overall, Lavrov's remarks at the BRICS meeting underscored Russia's commitment to fostering a multipolar world, enhancing financial independence from Western systems, and promoting inclusive economic development through strengthened cooperation among the BRICS countries. Foreign Minister Lavrov also addressed the status of negotiations with the United States to settle the Ukraine war. There are 5 bullet points attached to this topic, of negotiations for peace. First, I'm sorry, there are 5, rather 3 such bullet points. Russia did not see opportunities for monitoring in an honest way of the observance of a long-term ceasefire in the so-called Ukraine. The ability of the Kiev regime to carry out provocations is well known. 2, Vladimir Putin proposes to the authorities of the so-called Ukraine talks without preconditions. The ceasefire on Victory Day is part of this. Ukraine and Europe demand that Russia cease fire. Only because the armed forces of Ukraine are suffering defeats on the battlefield. That was the 3rd bullet point. Then there are some bullet points on the relations with the USA. Russia and the USA continue contacts in various spheres. The parties are trying to reach a balance of interests. At the same time, the Russian Federation will develop relations with the USA without prejudice to its partners. And a third bullet point on relations with the USA: Russia regularly informs its BRICS partners about the progress of the negotiations with the USA. But Donald Trump remains frustrated by his failure to stop the war in Ukraine, says Larry Johnson. But in his latest interview with the U.S. press, he again has changed his tune, and he is blaming Zelensky rather than Putin for the lack of progress. Sergei Lavrov pointed out, it's easier to deal with Putin than with Zelensky, who he has no cards. Specifically, Zelensky has no cards, and he keeps asking for more and more. He has no cards, and he keeps asking for more and more, and he has no trump cards. I hope he does it, make peace, because Putin wouldn't do it for anyone but me. I think he wanted to go all the way, but now he's ready to negotiate. So far, it's easier with him than with Zelensky. I'm sorry, I think I mislabeled this quote. It wasn't a quote from Lavrov, it was a quote from Donald Trump, okay, in one of the recent interviews that he has had. So, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is heading back to Russia this week. He will not hear anything new on Ukraine. I expect that Witkoff's primary mission is to get firm commitments from Putin with respect to the negotiations the U.S. is having with Iran. I believe that Russia, as it did in the first JCPOA, will agree to take control of all the uranium enriched at 20% and above. In addition, Putin will spell out how Russia will ensure that Iran does not build a nuclear device and will help the U.S. convince Iran to accept permanent inspectors. However, Putin will also insist that economic sanctions on Iran be lifted as part of the deal. How badly does Trump want a diplomatic success? Will he be able to resist the intense pressure from the Zionist lobby to scuttle the deal? Larry says, your guess is as good as mine. One final observation on some concessions Russia might be willing to make to secure a permanent peace. Here is one possible scenario. Again, let me emphasize, I'm merely suggesting one possible outcome. Over the course of the summer, Russia secures control of Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Sumy, and Kharkiv, 4 more of the oblasts of Ukraine. At that point, Russia controls all territory east of the Dnieper River. If Ukraine then agrees to negotiate on Russian terms, Putin will be in a position to offer to relinquish some, if not all, of the captured territory. Of course, I am assuming that Putin does not decide to hold referendums in the 4 oblasts on the question, do you want to rejoin the Russian Federation? Mind you, I am just posting one scenario. Personally, I don't think Putin will want to surrender territory his troops shed blood to capture. I just want you to, to think outside of the box and offer up some other possible scenarios. I am posting my chat with my dear friend, um, uh, um, um, uh, uh, Andrei Martyanov, which was recorded last Friday. Also, Marcello and I did our regular Tuesday chinwag. And so those videos are appended to the blog post. But that's the end, okay, of this blog. I thought this was a very interesting blog. It was interesting in terms of the positions that were stated by the Russians, by Lavrov. It was also interesting in terms of the scenario that that Larry offered about what's likely to happen on the military front uh, 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 from now over the course of the summer. And it was interesting for him to speculate about what Putin would want to do if things happen according to the scenario. I think this blog was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there you are, Dee. How you doing?
Yes. Okay, yes, it's quite the chaos when the show got started.
Yeah, I know there was a little chaos at your place, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you've got it under control now.
Yes, everything's under control. Let's just cross our fingers, right?
Yes. So that is very good. We've got uh, Evelina saying hello, okay, at 9:11. We have a number of other folks here, but there are no comments, okay, as yet. So I think we're set to go on to the second of the posts from
Okay.
Larry Summers. I'm sorry, from Larry Johnson.
Okay.
Certainly not Larry Summers.
No.
Uh, okay, I can post that. Okay, it's your turn to cover it, though.
Yes.
I've now shared it. Did you see it?
Yes, Sonar 21. U.S. is flummoxed by Yemen.
Yes.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. He is such a jerk. Message to Iran. We see your lethal support to the Houthis. We know exactly what you are doing. He does not know. You know very well what the U.S. military is capable of, and you are warned you will pay the consequence at the time and place of our choosing. Now that was a complete idiotic post,
It was an idiotic post.
and it was out of character for somebody in his position.
Yes. And not only out of character, but people who are secretaries of defense don't generally make statements like this. It's rather silly.
It is. He was being a bully on the block. Um, as we've said before, Yemen Houthis are following international law.
They are following international law. They're the only one following international law with respect to what's going on in Gaza.
Exactly. And here he is being a bully to the people that are following international law.
And we have more to say also of what's happened since this post. The day of this post was uh, um, actually the 30th of April, and the date of the tweet, quoted here was on May 1st. Since that time, the Houthis have sent the USS Truman scurrying away from the Red Sea, and they recently made a successful attack, on the
Mhm.
Ben Gurion airport, and they shut it down. They attacked another airport with, a military airport, with 3 ballistic missiles, and they've evidently shut that down. But the central point is that they now appear to have a military, air blockade, going against Israel. Where Israeli planes, uh, at least commercial flights, uh, uh, it's just not safe, for the airports to operate.
No, it's not.
So that's a step above the naval blockade that they've successfully imposed, in the Red Sea. Please go on with the article.
Okay. I almost don't know what to say about Pete Hegseth's social media post. It is juvenile, counterproductive, and dangerous. During my time living in Central America, I learned a very important piece of wisdom. The fish dies by its mouth. We need a comparable expression for social media posts like this one. Hegseth, like some angry teenager, is upset that Trump's version of Operation Prosperity Garden is a bust. Operation Prosperity Garden, OPG, was initiated in December of 2023 under the Biden administration. Continues to operate under its original name, but has been executed with an intensified ops tempo, as measured by bombing sorties and missile strikes inside Yemen. In February 2025, operational leadership transitioned from Combined Task Force 153 to Destroyer Squadron 50, a U.S. Navy surface warfare unit. The Trump team labored under the false assumption that the Biden folks did not make a serious effort to destroy the Houthis' arsenal of missiles and drones. The Trumpers believed that they could bomb the Houthis into submission. Instead, the U.S. is demonstrating to all countries in the region the limits of its naval and air power. The truth of the matter is that old Uncle Sam has an impotence problem, locating and destroying mobile missile platforms in a daunting task, especially in the rugged terrain of Yemen. After 7 weeks of bombing the Houthis, Uncle Sam's carrier strike group has failed to quell the Houthis. Not that the U.S. had a great reputation to begin with, but the bombing of civilian targets inside Yemen, which has produced scores of dead women and children, is only fueling greater hatred of the United States. Despite more than 600 bombing sorties, the Houthis continue to launch missiles and drones at U.S. ships in the Red Sea and targets inside Israel. If Houthi reports are accurate, they have shot down one MQ-9 Reaper drone every week since the start, i.e. 7, with an average cost of $35 million per drone. That means the cost so far is $245 million. Now, in the wake of the loss of another FA-18 Hornet, this one fell off the carrier and sank into the Red Sea. Hegseth is venting his frustration at Iran. It is not Iran's fault that the crew on the U.S. aircraft carrier failed to properly secure the jet and the tractor, which fell off the carrier during an emergency evasive maneuver. That was a 70 million oopsie. Since
I have to add.
70 million.
I have to add here. I've seen a lot of estimates of that. they start at roughly 50 million. Then I saw 60 million. Then I saw 70 million. And then I saw 80 million.
Okay,
I think these estimates are loose estimates.
but it's still a
How much?
large amount of money.
It's a large amount of money. It's a plane that's expensive.
Hmm.
And it just fell into the ocean.
Since Trump's 15 March order to renew attacks on Yemen, the U.S. has lost almost 500 million in planes and drones and failed to guarantee safe passage for Israeli vessels daring to enter the Red Sea. Good job, Mr. Hegseth. I discussed the situation in the Red Sea today on a roundtable with Danny Haifong and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. I discussed the absurdity surrounding Trump's peace gambit with Russia and the war in Ukraine with Danny Davis.
Right, who also is a colonel, I should add there. He's a lieutenant colonel, but
Okay.
a retired, lieutenant colonel. Okay, so that's the end of the second, of those blogs. As we said, the date of that one was April 30th. Since that time, Larry Johnson has continued to blog, and we'll keep going also. But let's look at our comments to see if we have any more comments on that. No, our commentariat is silent. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, Silent Night, I guess.
So I will move on to the third of our articles from Larry.
Yeah, 'cause I heard there was Pete Hegseth. I want to see exactly. He was taken out of a position.
So you've heard that he's no longer Secretary of Defense?
I don't know if it goes that far, but I know there was some type of demotion. I want to look up and see exactly what it is.
Okay, I hadn't yet heard that, but if it happens, it wouldn't surprise me
Right.
because he's an idiot.
He is.
Okay, to get to our third piece from Larry, that is dated 1st of May. So Larry, was basically doing a blog a day, through the last week. The title of this one is Donald Trump Only Trying to Derail the Negotiations with Iran. Is he only trying to do that, or is he trying to do something more? That's the question. So here's a tweet from Donald. What he says, is alert. All purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. Any country or person who buys any amount of oil or petrochemicals or chemicals from Iran will be subject to immediately secondary sanctions. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States of America in any way, shape, or form. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. All in caps, of course. President Donald J. Trump. At first glance, Donald Trump's recent post on Truth Social appears to be a deliberate effort to sabotage the negotiations with Iran to ensure that Tehran ends all efforts to build a nuclear weapon. And maybe that is his intent. But when you step back and look at the countries who import Iranian oil or petrochemicals, you will realize that Trump is going after three countries: India, China, and Turkey. Turkey, with China as the primary target. Iran is just an excuse. It is typical bombast from Trump. He might as well have added the warning, there will be hell to pay. He talks a big game, but when it comes to closing a deal, tends to soften. All these, sexual innuendos from Larry are really very funny. Just look at the so-called rare, the rare earth minerals deal that Trump's Treasury Secretary signed Wednesday night with some low-level Ukrainian official. I think that many people around the world are fed up, with Trump's antics. Early on Thursday, East Coast time, I learned that the negotiation between Iran and the U.S., which is scheduled to take place in Europe on Saturday, had been postponed. So there we are, no negotiations on Saturday. According to U.S. press reports, this action was prompted by a major disagreement between Trump advisors who wanted to deal with Iran and the Zionists and his administration who insist on carrying water for Bibi Netanyahu. And then news broke that Trump was replacing Michael Waltz, his national security advisor, and sending Waltz to the UN. Instead of announcing a permanent replacement, Trump named Secretary of State uh, um, 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 Marco Rubio as his acting National Security Council advisor. I should mention here, by the way, that I don't know it's going to be easy for Trump to get confirmation for Mike Waltz to go to the UN. People may be a bit fed up by this time, and maybe the Senate isn't going to confirm him, or maybe this was just wishful thinking on my part, but so there it is. Maybe it is chaos rather than a desire to cater to the wishes of the Zionists in Tel Aviv. That explains why the U.S. requested a postponement of the Saturday meeting in Europe. Some are speculating that Trump will give the job of NSC advisors to Witkoff, Steve Witkoff, while others suggest Trump could give the job to Keith Kellogg, or Michael Anton. I think to give the job to Kellogg, or to Michael Anton would run completely counter to the dismissal of Waltz. So I don't think that's going to happen. Late on Thursday, the Iranians made their statement, according to Iran's press TV. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told reporters that the next round of indirect talks with the U.S. was postponed for logistical and technical reasons. The ambassador said the decision was made jointly by Iran, the U.S., and Oman as mediator of the talks. He stressed that there's no change in Iran's determination to secure a just deal and a negotiated solution to issues raised during the negotiations. The top diplomat said a just and balanced deal must guarantee an end to sanctions imposed on Iran. The deal must also create confidence that Iran's nuclear program will forever remain peaceful, while ensuring that Iranian rights are fully respected. The talks are focused on achieving a replacement for the 2015 nuclear deal, which was derailed through the unilateral and illegal U.S. withdrawal in 2018. Tehran says any new deal must provide guarantees that Washington would not quit the agreement again and truly removes all anti-Iran sanctions. I think that last bit of a guarantee is going to be hard to get because you can put a guarantee like that in writing, okay, in the agreement. Okay, but Trump would simply tear it up, okay, if he wanted to. So you have to construct the agreement in such a way that there'll be a cost to Trump if he tears up the agreement, or a cost to the Congress if they tear up the agreement. So that means what Tehran has to seek, okay, is a new deal, which would allow it to do certain things, okay, if the U.S. were to welsh on the deal. For example, one of those things could be the right of Iran to ask the Russians to return, the uranium which had been shipped to them, okay, as a result of the deal. In other words, this would mean the cost, would be imposed on the United States if they welsh on a deal. Then that means the means for the Iranians to go nuclear, would be returned, okay, to them. And so that would be the penalty for welshing. I think you need something like that in order to guarantee the good behavior of Donald Trump and his administration, or the good behavior of Congress, or the good behavior of any Democratic administration that might come into power in 2029. Going on with the article, Trump's social media posts, see image posted at the start of this article, will be viewed by Iran as a hostile act. But it appears that Trump's actual target is China. As of 25, China remains the dominant importer of Iranian oil and petrochemical products, accounting for approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. Despite international sanctions, Iran's oil exports reached around 1.5 million barrels per day in the first 8 months of 2024, with China importing the bulk of this volume. Iran employs a ghost fleet of over 400 tankers to circumvent sanctions, utilizing tactics like ship-to-ship transfers and falsified documentation to deliver oil to Chinese ports. These shipments are often rebranded as originating from other countries and sold to independent Chinese refineries known as teapots. In addition to oil, Iran's petrochemical exports have grown, with China receiving over 80% of methanol and of methanol, okay, and monoethylene glycol, also known as MEG, exports, and about 2/3 of polyethylene shipments. The other countries importing Iranian oil and petrochemical include the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which serves as a trading hub, facilitating re-exports of Iranian products. Syria and Venezuela receive Iranian oil and petrochemicals, often through barter arrangements, okay, or political alliances. Turkey, Iraq, and India engage in limited trade with Iran, though volumes are significantly lower than China's. So all that is, very interesting information. It would be important, I think, to mention here that trade with China is not only going by sea, but in recent days, there have been shipments uh, 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 by rail, from Iran, going through Central Asia, okay, and ending up in China. So arrangements were made by the two countries to bypass the sea route, and to go by rail. And that's a new development. Okay, that's very important because it would avoid any blockading uh, or naval incidents and shipping oil, from Iran to China. If China makes good on its threat to add sanctions to these countries that buy Iranian oil and petrochemicals, he is only going to exacerbate the already dismal relations with China. While Trump may hope that the economic pain from U.S. sanctions will compel Xi Jinping to alter Chinese trade policies and kowtow to Washington, his actions are viewed in China not just by the leaders, but by the average Chinese man and woman in the street as an act of war. Given China's long history of being bullied and punished by Westerners, this is not going to sit well with the Chinese populace. I had a chance to chat about this and other matters pertaining to Yemen and Ukraine with Garland Nixon today, and there's a link to his Garland Nixon chat there. I do want to make a further comment on this piece by Larry. News just broke, at least I saw the headline of an item on YouTube this evening, that the Supreme Court had made a decision and had ruled that the tariffs that had been implemented by Donald Trump exceeded his authority to implement them, and that such critical changes in trading patterns caused by the tariffs had to be done in consultation, um, with Congress, and couldn't be done by the executive branch alone. If the report I saw was accurate, it should have the effect of canceling all the tariffs that were announced by Trump, on Liberation Day. There's that whole mess of tariffs, that whole list, country by country. And it also ought to temporarily get rid of any tariffs that have been imposed on China. So the Supreme Court has ruled, at least for the time being, that the tariffs are gone, and that if Trump wants to implement them, he has to get the consent of Congress. Now, I'm not relying on this report I saw, on YouTube yet. I mention it as a possibility that it might be true. I haven't had the time to double check it yet. But if it's true that this happened, it's a very helpful trend. And if one is really interested in making Trump start to grind his teeth, then this is surely a decision that's going to make him do that. So, anyway, that's a piece of good news. So, moving to your comments, there are evidently no further comments, which surprises me because there are a good many people here the indicator is showing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, since that's the case, then let us go on to the fourth of our articles from Larry Johnson.
Okay.
And that will be your turn, D.
Yes. Here we go.
And that is up there right now.
Okay, Sonar 21.
Sonar 21, yeah.
Donald Trump's grotesque lie about the U.S. role in the European theater in World War II. Oh, Donald Trump. Donald J. Trump. Many of our allies and friends are celebrating May 8th as Victory Day. But we did more than any other country by far in producing a victorious result on World War II. I am hereby renaming May 8th as Victory Day for World War II and November 11th as Victory Day for World War I. We won both wars. Nobody was close to us in terms of strength, bravery, or military brilliance, but we never celebrate anything. That's because we don't have leaders anymore that know how to do so. We are going to start celebrating our victories again.
That is the stupidest tweet I think I've ever seen. I mean, first of all, I know the rest of the article is going to get to the World War II situation, so I'm just going to comment on the World War One situation. No doubt, the entrance of the U.S. into the First World War was important for bringing the war to a conclusion, okay, and bringing the victory up, 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 to the Allies. However, there were many, many other nations that were involved on the Allied side, in the First World War, and uh, while that war was won with the assistance of the United States, it's really arrogant, okay, to say that we were the only winners of World War One. We had less of a role in winning the First World War probably than we had in winning the Second World War. And as we'll see, okay, in just a minute, as we go through this article, that uh, certainly we did not have a dominant role in winning victory in Europe in the Second World War. So please go on with the article, D.
Just when you think that Donald J. Trump has made the stupidest comment on social media, one completely divorced from reality, he decides to plumb greater depths of imbecility by demonstrating a profound ignorance of history. His Truth Social posting on World War II, see above, is so ridiculously wrong that I had to double check the date of the post to make sure this was not a belated April Fool's prank.
Right. Okay. So I didn't want to comment here, further comment. Less people think that Larry Johnson, okay, is unalterably opposed to Trump and is just some crazy Democrat who is just, dumping on Trump every chance he gets. Larry was among those who was very happy to see the defeat of the Biden administration by Trump, okay, and the defeat, okay, of Harris by Trump. He was among those who held out some hope that Trump was going to come to a peaceful agreement, with the Russians, and that he might follow a different policy in terms of the Middle East. Uh, You know, Larry was hoping for that, and at the start of the Trump administration, he made some positive kinds of comments, and some of his comments, okay, are still positive. But Larry's the kind of person who, when he sees bullshit, he calls bullshit.
Right.
And that is what this particular post is about. And he calls bullshit in no uncertain terms.
Right.
Please go on.
So let's review the history. World War II in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, known as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, when Nazi Germany officially surrendered to the Allied forces.
Okay, by the way, I'm old enough. I was 6 years old at the time. I'm old enough to remember the celebrations, old enough to remember the joy of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, okay, 1945. It was wonderful.
Mhm.
Please go on.
The unconditional surrender was signed on May 7, 1945, in Reims, France, with these signatories: General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Staff of the German Armed Forces, signed by Germany; General Walter Bedell Smith, Chief of Staff for Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, signed for Western Allies; General Ivan Suvorov, Soviet liaison officer, signed for the USSR; and Major General Franco Chavez, French representative, witnessed the signing. The terms: the document stipulated Germany's unconditional surrender to the Allies effective May 8 at 11:01 p.m. Central European Time.
Yes, truly a historic day
hmm
uh,
Jo-
for the Allies,
mhm.
for everyone, actually. It
Yes.
was a historic day.
Joseph Stalin protested, rightly so, arguing that Soviet forces did the vast majority of the fighting to defeat the Nazis, and that the Soviet Union had earned the right to preside over a more formal signing in Berlin, which took place on May 8, 1945. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signed for Germany in the presence of Allied representatives, including Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov. Although the surrender went into effect 23:01 hours Central European Time on May 8th, it corresponded to 0001 hours May 9th in Moscow. Thus, while the May 7th Reims surrender was the first, the Berlin signing on May 8th is celebrated in the West as the official end of the war in Europe, which Russia commemorates the event on May 9th. Now, for the facts about who had the heaviest lift. The Soviet Union inflicted at least 3 to 4 million German combat deaths, KII killed in action plus missing in action, plus millions more wounded or captured. When including prisoners of war deaths, the toll rises to what is that? A little less than 5 million.
Yeah, to approximately 5 million.
Yeah. No other Allied nation came close to inflicting such losses on Nazi Germany. The US and Western Allies, by contrast, inflicted approximately 374,000 German military deaths, permanently disabled about 85,000, captured over 8 million German soldiers, and caused between 350,000 and 500,000 German civilian deaths through strategic bombing during World War II. Fear of falling into the hands of the Soviet army explains why so many German units scurried like frightened rats to the front lines of the Western Allies and surrendered to the US and British soldiers. The figure that ought to haunt the West is the number of German civilians killed by US and British bombing of cities. we killed more civilians than we did German combatants. German military casualties versus Western allies. And there's the chart there.
That was for North Africa, for Italy, Western Europe, okay, and also the strategic bombing.
Mm.
And those were the estimated German losses. The total casualties were approximately 2.1 million to 2.8 million.
The Soviets and the Germans fought multiple massive battles that resulted in horrendous casualties for both sides. For the West, the Battle of the Bulge is the only engagement that came close to matching the Battle of Moscow, Stalingrad, the Siege of Leningrad, the Battle of Kursk, and Operation Bagration. Despite Western glorification of World War II as an heroic victory for the United States and Britain, both countries suffered relatively few casualties compared to what the Soviet soldiers and civilians experienced. In terms of combat deaths, the United States killed in action for both the European and Pacific theaters totaled less than 300,000. And then there's a breakdown of different branches of the military and the deaths.
Right. The total battle deaths were 291,557, broken down by the Army, including the Air Corps, okay, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. Non-battle deaths totaled 113,842, and also total deaths that were accounted for by Western services, altogether 405,399. Okay, please go on.
Soviet combat fatalities for its soldiers, sailors, and airmen are estimated between 8.1 and 11 million. Even more shocking is that an estimated 16 million to 19 million civilians were killed by the Nazis. That is why I am appalled and disgusted by Trump's claim that, quote, nobody was close to us in terms of strength, bravery, or military brilliance. The facts, irrefutable facts, prove otherwise, at least in the war against the Nazis. The Soviets, both military and civilians, surpassed the United States on every count. If Trump is looking to celebrate a remarkable military accomplishment, he should have focused on the war in the Pacific. In that case, the United States lost 111,000 Marines, sailors, and soldiers in combat compared to staggering Japanese losses 2.1 to 2.3 million. In other words, for every American combat casualty, 20 Japanese military personnel perished. I imagine that Trump's social media rant has been met in Russia by a combination of shock and bewilderment. It has undermined any confidence that Trump is a smart, well-informed person. To put it bluntly, he showed his ass. I discussed this as well as developments in West Asia and China with Nima and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, and later in the day with Judge Napolitano and Ray McGovern.
Any links to the two videos here for those interested. They were, of course, very good videos, and certainly, okay, I recommend them. I thought that this statistical correction to the claims of Donald Trump, it was very much in order, but what I want to emphasize is how insulting it is to the Russians and how stupid it was in order to destroy the atmosphere for successful talks. The Russian people and the leaders of Russia are rightly proud of their accomplishments and performance, in the Second World War. And to have Trump just ignorantly claim that it was we who, won that war. There's no question, we contributed a lot. The Lend-Lease program was very, very important and probably saved Russia. Okay, our continuous efforts to arm Russia and help them, to resist what Germany was doing, certainly very, very important. But there's no gainsaying the fact that the Germans lost Europe in the Second World War because of the successful defense by the Russians, the heroism they showed, and the results that they got in destroying the military force, of Germany. It was not us who destroyed their military force. Our invasions of Italy and North Africa, and the invasion of Western Europe, by the United States, they all contributed because they took pressure off what Germany was doing up in the East. But the main efforts that were successful in destroying the army of Adolf Hitler were definitely accomplished by the Soviet Union. And I don't think anybody can reasonably take the credit away from them for winning World War II inside of Europe. I don't think the United States efforts were close to the efforts of the Soviet Union in gaining that particular result. And it's just insulting to say anything different when you consider they lost something like 24 to 27 million people, in that effort. And that so many families in the Soviet Union, were affected by deaths in their families, as a result of the war. It is just insulting to make a statement that denies the glory of winning but to the Russians. And it sets a terrible atmosphere for the peace talks. It's so irritating. It's so insulting. It's so stupid. And it should make clear to the American people what damage is done by electing a stupid and ignorant and arrogant man to be the president of the United States. Now, I don't say this from the point of view of saying that it would have been better to vote for Harris. I don't know whether, it would have been better to vote for Harris. I do know that it was a horrible choice. And in both instances, we had a choice of two relatively stupid and ignorant people. And we would not vote for third parties. We would not vote for others who are more competent and who are more capable. But we insisted on voting for the terrible choices provided us by the two parties. And we keep doing that. And as long as we keep on doing that, we're going to fail as a nation. We've got to elect people who are not entirely corrupt, and especially people who are much smarter than either of these choices. I'm sorry, Dee, I interrupted you.
Now, what I was going to say is that um, there was a lot of people that didn't vote during the election, and that made a big chance. I mean, it changed things because people were angry at the choices. They were angry at the Democrat choice.
Yes, they were. And that was a big reason for the victory, okay, of Trump. But we have to say one thing about the victory of Trump, in spite of the stupidity of the whole thing. If it's true that he's still seeking peace with the Russians, okay, in Eastern Europe, that is a big improvement over the horrible effort by the Biden administration. A big improvement, okay, over that. If it's true that he's seeking an agreement with Iran, that is another step forward. Uh, and especially in that area, we have to ask, okay, the question: would Harris have done something like that herself? Okay, I just don't know. She was so bought, by the Israeli lobbies, so
Mm-hmm.
craven and so conservative that one just cannot say. I mean, one cannot come up with a reasonable expectation, uh, okay, of her running a better foreign policy than Trump has so far run. And that's to say something really terrible because, Trump's foreign policy, the failure to end the Iran war, when he could have ended it in a very short time if he simply stopped sending all the support into Iran. On the first day after he took over, he could have said, "We are out. I was always opposed to this war. I do
Mm-hmm.
not want it. It's been terribly destructive, and I'm not having any part of it. I am ending U.S. participation in this war right now." And if he had done that on January 21st or January 20th, this war would be long over. So we have to, say that about him. But I don't think that Harris is likely, to have been any better. I mean, she was hanging on to the Biden position on war to the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no evidence that she would have been better when it comes to the Middle East either.
No.
It's just awful. So John B. says, we are all gobsmacked by the stupidity of U.S. leadership, Joe. Absolutely speechless idiocy on display. John B. says, the U.S. entered World War I about 7 months before the war ended. Even then, they didn't enter as ally. They entered only as associates. Yes, you're right, but John B. We did have great contributions in some critical battles, okay, at the end of the war, but it would be a travesty to say that we won that war. There's no way that that is true. Evelyn says, and the misnomer Spanish flu, really the Kansas flu, also took millions of lives to all of our allies, including our own soldiers in World War I. Millions of the lives of our allies, and John B. says the U.S. won World War II in monetary terms only. At the end of World War II, the U.S. had accumulated about 75% of the world gold reserves extracted from reparations from World War I and supplying arms, services, etc. to the warring nations. Thank you, John B. That was good information to contribute to our discussion here. Okay, let us move on now to the fourth of our articles. I think this one is my turn, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. The name of this article is Demoting Waltz. It's also from Sonar 21. Will Trump avoid, a war with Iran? And there's Mike Waltz. The Washington Post published a story today, Saturday, written by a crew of reporters that purportedly gives the behind the scenes account of why Michael Waltz was fired as the national security advisor, while the White House is using the lipstick on a pig technique by painting Waltz's move to the UN as a promotion. Nothing could be further from the truth. As National Security Advisor, Waltz had the task of coordinating the president's policy goals with the Pentagon, the Department of State, and the intelligence community, ostensibly to ensure everyone was singing from the same sheet of music. If Waltz manages to survive the confirmation process, and I think he may not pass that challenge, then he will be working as a subordinate to Marco Rubio. That ain't a promotion, boys and girls. The publication of this article, replete with quotes from unnamed sources in the White House, is a sign that Waltz is going to face an uphill climb to secure Senate approval. The juicy tidbits in this article will provide the Democrats and some Republicans great grist to grind Waltz into the dust. There will be embarrassing questions about Waltz pursuing an independent foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel, as well as a deep dive on Signal Gate. Waltz will be under oath and will be asked about any previous communications or contact with Jeffrey Goldberg, for example. I would not be surprised to learn in the coming weeks that Waltz will withdraw from the process, provided he can secure a lucrative job with one of the Beltway bandits. Yes, that is the consulting companies that populate the Beltway around Washington, D.C., and in the suburbs of Washington. This Washington Post story intent, in my judgment, is to damage Waltz even more. Let's look at the details. According to the Post, the Washington Post, Waltz ran afoul of Trump over Israel. If true, that is welcome news. I agree, if he ran afoul, okay, because it means that Trump is not in sync, okay, with Netanyahu when it comes to Israel and when it comes to Gaza. President Donald Trump's decision to oust his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, was the product of a slow accumulation of frustration with the former Green Beret officer, who was seen as far more eager to use military force than his boss in the Oval Office. Again, this is a quote from the Washington Post. Continuing, Waltz's fate was sealed by his inclusion of a journalist, that of course was Jeffrey Goldberg, on a sensitive Signal group chat in March. But he had been clashing with other top officials since early in the administration, including over whether to pursue military action against Iran, senior officials and Trump advisors said on Friday. The key decider of Waltz's fate was Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who in my view is one of the more sane members of the Trump administration. According to the Post report, Waltz's troubles built up over time, and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles increasingly felt he was not a good fit for the president. What a way to put it. According to a senior White House official, a Trump advisor, and one additional person familiar with the matter on Friday. The big stumbling block, according to the Post report, was the perception that Waltz was conspiring with Bibi Netanyahu to push Trump into attacking Iran. And here's another quote from the Washington Post. But Waltz also upset Trump after an Oval Office visit in early February by Israeli Prime Minister uh, um, Netanyahu, when the National Security Advisor appeared to share the Israeli leader's conviction the time was right to strike Iran, two of the people said. Going on with the quote, the view by some of the administration was that Waltz was trying to tip the scales in favor of military action and was operating hand in glove with the Israelis. Quote, if Jim Baker, that is a quote within the Washington Post quote, if Jim Baker was doing a side deal with the Saudis to subvert George H.W. Bush, you'd be fired, the Trump advisor said, referring to Bush's Secretary of State. Quote, you can't do that. You can't work for the president of your country. You work, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You work for the president of your country, not a president of another country, unquote. Larry says, man, I hope that is true, i.e., that Trump is not going to allow Netanyahu to set U.S. policy towards Iran. At this juncture in the presidency of Donald Trump, I suspect most of you, along with me, believe that Trump is firmly in the pocket of the Zionists. Many people, like J.D. Vance and Tucker Carlson, are having some success in warning Trump about the dangers of acceding to the wishes of Netanyahu with respect to attacking Iran. The situation with respect to the battle raging in Washington between the pro-Zionist crowd who want to attack Iran and those who believe such a move will be, at a minimum, very damaging to Donald Trump and U.S. interests in the Persian Gulf is precarious. Stay tuned, says Larry. And of course, we are staying tuned to that. That's one of the big issues of the day. More specifically, whether the U.S. will conclude a peace agreement with Iran to remove the risk, of nuclear war from the Iranian side there. Of course, it would remain, to remove the risk of nuclear war from the Israeli side. That's a much bigger problem, which the U.S. has not attempted to do anything about. On the contrary. Okay. So let's consider whether we have any comments on that yet. We don't seem to. Dee, do you have any comments on that one?
No. No.
It's really pretty straightforward, right?
Yes.
Yes. So let us go on to our next piece, which is by Pepe Escobar, and it is your turn for that, Dee.
Okay,
And I will
Pepe.
share it for you.
Okay.
Okay. This is a very entertaining piece, as they usually are from Pepe.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, let me get the title up there for you.
Going to Kashmir just to find Alice in Wonderland by Pepe Escobar, April 30th, 2025. Welcome to, quote, ruler of the world, does Wonderland, to the sound of that hypnotic Kashmir rift.
I'm afraid I have never heard that riff.
Nope. Two overarching taboos reign on the now shattered collective West. 1. Can't define the Ukraine regime as Nazi. 2. Can't condemn the psychopathological Israeli genocide in Gaza. The taboos happen to be inextricably linked to the forever wars deployed non-stop by the Empire of Chaos, Zionist Axis. Lesser hybrid wars through even carrying the horrifying prospect of turning nuclear are allowed to come and go, especially if they are part of the current war on BRICS, a subsection of the war of factions of the West against the global majority. So let's go to Kashmir, to the sound of Jimmy Page Hypnotic Rift. Both India and Pakistan are escalating the war of disabilities. Turkey is offering weapons to Pakistan. Iran offered a mediator role. No takers. The motive for the war is as dodgy as they come. An all-male tourist bus packing a bunch of merry tourists is roaming around Indian-held Kashmir. Passengers include a just-married 26-year-old lieutenant of the Indian Navy. But without his wife, what kind of honeymoon is that?
I don't know. It's awfully strange.
It is. Another passenger is Nepalese. The bus is attacked by shady splinter goons loosely affiliated with the Salafi Jihadi Lashkar-e-Taiba outfit.
Yes.
The empire has been all over the Indian front. The current U.S. Director of National Intelligence, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, was previously fully funded by Prime Minister Modi's circles. Eyeliner loaded VP J.D. Vance recently visited India, complete with family Taj Mahal photo op. Then Modi went to visit Saudi Arabia, invited by MBS after the Kashmir bus terror attack. Hindu Vada fanatics went on a cyber attack spree. The crude tactics spelt out classic divide and rule, double whammy, revamped weaponization of India, and destabilization of a key Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China Front, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, a thing of beauty, splitting BRICS from the inside.
Mm.
None of that, of course, legitimizes the ghastly Pakistani military, which have thrown in jail on spurious charges the man who was trying to bring Pakistan to respectability, Imran Khan.
Yes, the soccer hero.
Yeah, it's up once again to the adults in the room, any room, Russia, to de escalate. This could be ideally performed inside the SCO,
The SEO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
where both India and Pakistan are members, side by side with Iran. Moscow chose to take the initiative by itself.
Yes.
De- Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko met with both India's ambassador to Russia, Vinay Kumar, and Pakistan's ambassador to Russia, Muhammad Khalid Jamali. Russian terminology is essential. Not only there was a for both parties to, quote, engage in constructive dialogue, Moscow stressed, quote, we are ready to counter the global terrorist threat again. The operative word is global. Delhi and Islamabad don't seem to be getting the message yet. Kashmir as volatile war lab. An inferno machine is predictably on. It's as if the Anglo-Zionist axis using Kashmir as a volatile lab for a series of live tests, including pushing nuclear powers to the brink of confrontation, and all that dealt with a casual insouciance.
Uh, uh, the word is insouciance.
Insouciance.
All right. And it means uh, completely unserious.
Mhm. practically as a sideshow. This whole thing is terrible.
Yes, it is.
Nothing, yeah, nothing coming from Sultan Erdogan and his intel apparatus could possibly be seen as trustworthy. In Syria, the MIT's assets, the Head Chopper Inc., congregated in Greater uh, Idlibistan, ended up being installed in power in Damascus with their Zionist-friendly gang leader, now posing as president.
Yes, except he's not so friendly anymore since he's been getting attacked by the Israelis.
Exactly. The Comprador Yankee junta in Islamabad, for its part, may be facing the abyss, which it itself qualifies as auspicious news. In parallel, suspense accrues on whether Modi will show up for the Victory Day parade on May 9th in Moscow, and what he will tell his Russian host. BRICS members Russia and Iran want the international north-south transportation corridor running smoothly to India sooner rather than later. The game gets even more complex when we see that the Iranian investigation is finally starting to consider that the horrendous explosion at the Shahid Rajai port may have been an act of sabotage or an FPV strike. Extra pressure on China is a real motivator for setting up this war lab. Now, Beijing not only needs to start worrying about an explosively renewed India-Pakistan front, but also extra CIA M16 mischief pushing the PAC connection to the Yigas, Salafi jihadis.
Uh, the Uyghur Salafi jihadi.
Yeah. There's no chance in hell Delhi, Delhi will really understand Beijing's geopolitical predicaments. A perfect scenario for the hybrid war gang. Meanwhile, as the BRICS front, as at least there are some signs of rationality coming. Once again, from Grandmaster Lavrov. Even before the BRICS foreign ministers meeting early this week in Rio, Lavrov cut to the chase on the financial and geo-economic front. He stressed that BRICS are working hard on the 2024 Kazan Summit approved quote, Trans-Border Payment Initiative, quote, a payment and clearing infrastructure, a reinsurance company, and a new investment platform. He had to once again explain to Western media from the US to Brazil that, quote, it would be premature to discuss transition to a single currency for BRICS. We are working together to create a payment and settlement infrastructure for carrying out cross-border settlements among BRICS countries. In particular, as I have already said, this includes increasing the share of national currencies in our transactions. A BRICS common currency, a specter hovering over Trump 2.0, will only come back on the table, quote, once the necessary financial and economic conditions are in place. Until then, the war on BRICS, hybrid and otherwise, will be relentless. Humpty Dumpty.
Okay, so before we go on with Trumpty Dumpty, it would be important to emphasize how important this statement, okay, of Pepe's is. Uh, we are not near a single currency for BRICS yet. The necessary financial and economic conditions have to be put in place. excuse me, the act of putting them into place is ongoing and will take some time. We are looking at years. Uh, I'd estimate still probably 2 or 3 years to a common currency for BRICS, and there will be, I think, a lot of fighting about the necessary financial and economic conditions. That said, a lot of progress has been made in increasing the share of national currencies in the transactions of BRICS. As the earlier piece that we went over tonight had said, something like 70 to 75% of transactions among the BRICS nations are taking place in local currency, rather than taking place in dollars. And that's considerable progress. Okay, let us get on with Trumpy Dumpty then, D.
Switching from reality to fantasy, it was such a blast to find the connection between Kashmir and Alice in Wonderland in a Chinese essay. It takes supreme Chinese finesse, quite like subverting Taoist wisdom with a touch of postmodernism to identify the, quote, ruler of the world, his own terminology, throwing everyone, virtually the whole planet, into the rabbit hole.
And doing so with his tariffs, of course.
Yes, so in this wilderness of narrative mirrors, Trump should be perceived as all characters combined. White Rabbit, Humpty Dumpty. When I use a word, it means that I choose to mean, no more, no less. The Mad Hatter, the Queen of Hearts, off with their heads. That certainly illustrates the intersection of the trade war launched by the ruler of the world and the genocide war fully legitimized by the ruler of the world with an extra twist. Reality that has a knack to out Carol even Lewis Carroll himself.
Very clever, Pepe.
Yes. Enter the curious case of the USS Truman, a giant aircraft carrier being possessed by the spirit of Ayrton Senna and deciding to pull out an ultra-sharp curve as if it was a Maserati Gran Turismo Stradale in the middle of the Red Sea. Just for an F-18E Super Hornet to protest about the maneuver plunging head on to the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, that's so embarrassing.
It is. At least that was the narrative CENTCOM sold to global public opinion. Blame that damned Houthi missile fire. Well, CENTCOM has been relentlessly humiliated by the Yemeni armed forces. 21 MQ-9 Reapers smashed and counting, as it has accomplished zero military objectives. The Pentagon has now subdued the Houthis and has not secured, quote, freedom of navigation in the Red Sea for Israeli-bound ships. Their revenge to bomb Yemeni civilian targets nonstop. All that because the, quote, ruler of the world launched an illegal war against people guided by moral and spiritual clarity to protect the genocide perpetrated by his psychopathological regime buddies. Welcome to, quote, ruler of the world, does Wonderland, to the sound of that hypnotic Kashmir riff.
So that is one hilarious blog post in terms of the interweaving of all the allusions to a variety of other things. You have to reread it 2 or 3 times to understand what he's doing here.
Yes.
But he's really painting a very good picture of the insanity of the Trump administration.
Exactly. Every day is insanity.
Yes, every day is insanity. And also the difficulty of that administration interacting, with the rest of the world and the other conflicts, that exist in the world, uh, okay, including the India-Pakistani conflict uh, 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 in Kashmir, suddenly rearing, its ugly head and creating considerable problems for the BRICS nations and for Russia, and China, uh, uh, um, and Iran, which provide a very serious context for that conflict. I hope the power of the context of those three nations is sufficient to tamp down the possible conflict between the Indians and the Pakistanis, because that's a conflict that could go nuclear. It's another potential nuclear conflict because both of those nations have a considerable number of of nuclear weapons, and it would be a catastrophe, if they were used on one another. So, actually, that's the best article I've seen so far on that particular conflict, and the best article I've seen trying to relate it to Trump 2.0, at least to make an elementary discussion of how it relates to Trump 2.0 and the other events going on in the Red Sea and the fight um, um, with Yemen. I have to emphasize for the second time tonight uh, how serious a defeat the U.S. is experiencing in the Red Sea. Uh, I mean, the impotence of the U.S. is really being shown up there, and as the war goes on there, uh, that is the Red Sea War, it appears that the Yemenis are getting more and more powerful in terms of the damage that they're doing to Israel. Instead of, getting weakened by attacks from the West, they appear to be growing stronger and delivering an increasing amount of punishment to Israel. Truly amazing. So let's see if we have any comments on that one. Even it says no comment on the flu that took the lives of Europeans during World War I, including many historical figures and artists, and its origin in the U.S. Uh, I'm sorry, Evelina. It's certainly a very terrible occurrence, but beyond that, I don't know exactly what to say about it. So there it is. So we've been joined by the King of the Earth 21. So Evelina raises questions and said, it is said it spread on the continent originated when infected U.S. soldiers joined the Allies, subsequently blamed on the Spanish. King of the Earth says, you are asking of me, I am Earth King of Jerusalem and Palestine, and I am Earth the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and Earth of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and Earth High Chieftain of Creation, second only to Jesus Christ. Well, as long as you're going to be the king of all that, I mean, why stop at second only to Jesus Christ? I mean, why not go further? King of the Earth 21 says, the Houthis are honors to their blood oaths to defend the Hebrew for eternity. I don't think they're defending the Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10, verse 3, Moses lied. Are the Ashkenazi the Jews and Moses lied, or did the Ashkenazi lie and Moses tell the truth? I have no idea what you're talking about, King of the Earth 21. Are you guilty of blasphemy against Moses by definition of claiming a thing is different than how Moses defined it in Torah correctly by name? King of the Earth, I am usually guilty, of blasphemy because I am afraid that my impression of the various religious traditions is very simply that they are all bullshit. King of the Earth says, are you guilty of being the Jew of darkness from Judges chapter 2, verses 10? Are you the Jew of light who fights Hamas, the Hebrews, against murdering any sensuous? Are you knowing of the Levi and what Levi did over Dinah, his sister? Dinah, the only daughter of Jacob, Levi, the first high priest of the God Most High, Levi and Donna Rajab. What the hell is he talking about? U.S. self-isolation from world trade will likely expedite the development of an alternative settlement agreement. Trump's decree on trade with Iran could well be the catalyst that drives it onward. Perhaps so, John B. King of the Earth says, in Rajab, Queen of Clan Rajab, the house of Noah Rajab of the flood, the only woman to ever be afforded the rank of true prophet. Her claim against the newborn baby Ashkenaz was true in time. Well, I'm afraid I can't comment on any of this stuff because it seems like it's all nonsense to me, King of the Earth. John B. says, Keynes' Bancorp structure seems a good starting point for BRICS, but will require some supranational administration structure. I think that Keynes' ideas on the Bancorp structure are being studied very carefully by BRICS, and that's been true from the start. But I don't know very much how the negotiations are proceeding. And Bonnie has a question.
I want to know what the dropping the tariffs, how that's going to affect everyone in the world.
Well, if the tariffs get blocked, if they're blocked by the Supreme Court, then that raises a crisis of authority. The authority will be from the Supreme Court saying that Trump doesn't have the authority to apply the tariffs. Yeah. If Trump says, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, I do have the authority to apply the tariffs, then it seems to me that there's going to be a fight because the Supreme Court is likely to hold people who enforce the tariffs in criminal contempt. Okay, and then that's going to create a constitutional crisis, just one of the areas in which there can be a constitutional crisis. If Trump decides that he can get what he wants by beginning to talk to the Congress about it, then that is a victory for constitutionalism, but I don't know whether the Congress, well, I'll say what I think. I don't think the Congress is going to reaffirm the tariffs of Trump. Most of the tariffs are not going to be reaffirmed by Congress, in spite of the fact that Trump is going to ask the Republicans to back him. But it may be that the Republicans will decide to back him on just a few of the tariffs. How they'll do that, I don't know, but they might want to do something to save his face. And so that's why they may back him on a few of the tariffs. Now, if they back him by giving their consent to a few of the tariffs, then the Supreme Court will be satisfied. So the question is, what is Congress going to do? That's going to depend a lot on pressure that descends upon Congress from people here in the United States. A lot of businesses are terribly affected by the tariffs. I think the nation that Trump most wants to tariff is China, of course. But that's also the nation where the tariffs are most controversial because so much of what we depend upon as key components coming from China. For example, those who were very excited about a possible shortage of toilet paper in this country uh, may be very enthusiastic about pressuring Congress about uh, not joining with Trump to do anything to threaten our supply of toilet paper.
Somebody here could invent it.
Uh, well, it's not a question of not having the capability to produce the toilet paper ourselves. It's a question of having the capability to produce the machines
Yeah,
that we use to make the toilet paper.
right.
That is what's key from the Chinese point of view. So, uh, John B says Trump could send Musk to cancel the court's funding. That will fix him. No, it won't, because the administration of the courts is under the Supreme Court itself. Okay, it's resident in the Federal Judicial Center. And Musk will not be able to get into the Federal Judicial Center because it is not subject to the executive branch. And the Supreme Court is not going to give him any authority to get in there. So he's stuck with respect to the Federal Judicial Center. Okay. They're just not going to let him in.
He has enough money to build machines to handle making the toilet paper.
I can just imagine Trump going into machines,
And one,
that can manufacture toilet paper. Boy.
he may want his face on every little piece of paper.
So Trump cannot send Musk to cancel the funding of the courts, but what he can do is try to get Speaker Johnson and some of his other allies on Capitol Hill to impact the funding of the courts. But I think that kind of bill is going to be very difficult to pass because I don't think the Senate, is going to go along with that. I'm not even thinking of the filibuster here. I think even if they tried to do a reconciliation bill to affect the funding of the courts, that there would be many senators who would be completely opposed to that and who are not going to go along with the Trump administration. So I think even if it just comes down to a majority vote, through a reconciliation bill, I think the Senate will defeat any attempt by Trump to cancel the funding of the federal courts. I don't think that's going to happen. So, King of the Year at 21 says, because you asked a newborn baby Ashkenaz at the shattering of languages of the Tower of Babel and the story of the genocide of Palestine and the murder most foul of Hind Rajab was told, the first. I'm very familiar with the Hind incident. Of course, I deplore it, but I don't see that anything you're saying has anything to do with the price of eggs, if you catch my meaning. You are talking nonsense. Please go elsewhere to talk your nonsense. Okay, there still remains one more thing for us to go through. It's a pretty outstanding thing. It's an interview that Professor Glenn Deason, he's a professor from I think it's the southeast, he's professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern um, um, uh, 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 Norway, and he recorded an interview with Scott Ritter. I don't know if he lime streaked it at first or not, but I'm going to go through the interview starting at 9 minutes and 27 seconds in. It's an interview that runs for 38 minutes and 52 seconds. So we'll have roughly 29 minutes of the interview, and I will frequently stop it in order to comment on it. It's a very, very, it's an interview pregnant with very interesting statements by Scott Ritter and very good questions from Glenn Deason. So let us go on with that right now. I must, of course, share that. So let me share the screen for that interview. And the interview is about the failure, of the negotiations between the United States and Russia, over Ukraine. So,
to generate support and worked with Ukraine to create a consensus policy direction designed to create a conflict to undermine Russia to bring down Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump's a prisoner. This is Donald Trump's war. No matter how much he wants to say Joe Biden's war, the fact of the matter is that Trump created all of the preconditions to this conflict. Trump did. So now today, Trump is a prisoner of this reality. And I think he doesn't want to talk about it too much because he runs the risk of people raising their hand and raising inconvenient truths. So what Trump has done is broken his team into two parts. One part of it is the Keith Kellogg part. I think Mike Waltz is on this side. These are the pro-NATO, very sympathetic to Ukraine people. These are the people that have been in that camp from day one, who still believe ultimately the American mission should be to use Ukraine to bring down Russia. Then on the other side, he has the people that are supportive of the policies that he are articulating, bringing an end to the conflict, normalizing relations with Russia. I might say that Marco Rubio is in that first camp as well. But the second camp, this is where you get the Pete Hegseths, you get the J.D. Vances, you get a new name that's emerged, Steve Witkoff, a man who prior to this iteration of the Trump administration, nobody knew about. And today,
here's how you can end any fight in seconds with this nearly indefensible move that I'm going to show you right now. Picture this.
Today, he's one of the most accomplished diplomats in the world, doing Kissingerian type, shuttle diplomacy. And I say that with praise. I mean, I'm in awe of what Witkoff is doing. And I admire what he's doing, and I hope that he succeeds. But Trump has created this bipolar national security team that's at war with itself. They're out there. There is no discipline in terms of messaging right now. You can get Witkoff to meet with Putin and say one thing, then immediately you have Kellogg go on TV and say something completely different. So basically, we have a Ukrainian policy that's at war with itself. And this leads to dysfunction because how do you expect Europe to, what are they supposed to align themselves to? Which wing of the Trump party? And what they do is they gravitate around that which expresses sympathy for their point of view, which is the Kellogg, Rubio, Mike Waltz, center of gravity, in hopes that this other center of gravity under Witkoff and everybody, falls in on them instead of the other way around. And if Trump doesn't fix this, if he doesn't exercise, executive control over this, it's a policy that's doomed to fail. Now, the good news is, if there's any good news, is I think that this Ukrainian peace initiative is going to collapse. I don't have confidence in the Trump team to pull it together, but I think that Trump's strategic vision of having better relations with Russia will survive. That Trump will walk away from this Ukraine conflict, and in doing so, walk away from Ukraine and walk away from NATO, meaning that he's going to let Ukraine and NATO stew in their own juices. Russia will have to do the hard lifting, the heavy lifting, and finish this job militarily. And at some point in time, Ukraine is going to have to accept terms of surrender. They're going to be far harsher than the terms that are currently put on the table. And NATO will be in a far more difficult position, having been embarrassed without any American backstop.
Okay, so I'm still not entirely sure just why Trump split his team in two, okay, from the start. I understand that Trump was a prisoner, okay, of his previous actions, like in the first 9 minutes or so of this, which I did not play, goes over the history, of Ukraine, and points out that Trump was instrumental in building up the Ukrainians so they could, become a threat, okay, to Russia, which then, of course, resulted in the intervention by the Russians in February of 2022, okay, this war. Trump has a lot of the blame for this war because he spent his presidency in building up the capability, okay, of Ukraine to fight. I understand he doesn't want people talking about that or pointing that out, and people are pointing that out, but I don't understand the reason why that caused him to split his team, okay, in two. Nonetheless, it's an established fact that Scott is right in analyzing that there's a split in Trump's team, in two. And so Scott's analysis does deal with that particular split. Now, since this interview was cut, the news broke that Mike Waltz was replaced as National Security Advisor, which does create a big hole, okay, in the part of the team that is so pro-Zionist and suggests, okay, that Trump is more interested in supporting the other part of the team that is for a peace agreement, with Iran, and that is also for a peace agreement in Ukraine, okay, as well. Okay, but that's not a complete victory for that part of the team because Keith Kellogg is still around and still making statements. Okay, and Marco Rubio has been appointed, at least temporarily, as the National Security Advisor as well as Secretary of State. Okay, and Rubio, of course, is known for the Zionism he has represented for so long. So even though Waltz was replaced, it isn't as clear as it might be that this is a great victory for the other team, favoring peace. That said, Scott's analysis indicates his feeling that the indecisiveness of Trump and the playing of both sides, he's basically telling us that that was a cause of the failure, okay, of the negotiations. And his analysis also says that in spite of that, he thinks that Trump is going to go ahead, with further negotiations with the Russians, to try to come to a normalization agreement with them. I agree with Scott about that, but I think it's relevant to ask what will be the negotiations focused on now. We are seeing Trump take steps to abandon a continuing commitment to support the Ukrainians and the Europeans in continuing the war, in Ukraine. In other words, Trump at some level seems to be washing his hands of it now. And that speaks well for the future of further talks with Russia, and with Putin. And the idea that they've scheduled a meeting, in Abu Dhabi coming up fairly soon, also suggests that Trump is going to continue pursuing peace, with them. I don't know whether Witkoff is going to be at that meeting, but the emphasis was that it was going to be a direct meeting between Trump, and Putin. And so that kind of promises at least that an overall understanding might be reached, an abstract understanding, not strong on details yet, but at least an understanding of the spirit of the agreement. But what should such an agreement actually focus on? In my view, what it should focus on is a security framework that would include the United States, all of Europe, and Russia, that kind, of peace agreement. It can't be a peace agreement for the whole world yet. That would be too broad for them to accomplish. But they could do a security framework for Europe, not immediately, but over a period of time if they continue talking. And they also maybe could come to maybe a security framework for West Asia too, if the negotiations with Iran are successful. Dee, do you have any comments on that first part of it yet?
No, continue.
Was my analysis okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go a little further with it now. I thought that most of the analysis that Scott did here was actually pretty brilliant, and Glenn seems to respond with sort of the same kind of a reaction, as we'll see.
In U.S.-Russian relations, I think will develop. We will develop strategic alignment on some critical issues. We're not going to be best friends, but I think we're going to be in a position where we treat each other with respect. We recognize respective areas of interest, and we try to get out of each other's way when it comes to China.
Well, yes, one thing that confused me a bit was the content of this peace they're pushing, because it seemed as if the deal the United States was pushing forward to the Ukrainians was all focused around Crimea. And this was a bit strange to me, because the Russians, they kind of put their demands very clear, and they repeat them over and over. We want, neutrality for Ukraine, and also territorial concessions for the territories that were lost in the war. But why is Crimea? I heard talks about reducing sanctions, but the Russians didn't ask for it. They asked for, they're focusing a lot on Crimea, recognizing Crimea, but the Russians didn't really ask for this either. Why is this seemingly the central focus of talks?
They told me I had to live with mucus forever, but this weird 7-second lung clearing method helped me breathe free.
Nothing I can do about that.
Okay, I'm going to answer the question because I've thought about this too, but it's full of speculation. So I need to acknowledge that up front. This is just my assessment.
Yeah, I think that's all we have now, because we haven't explained this. So yeah.
When I take a look at the statements made by Donald Trump and his administration, but especially Trump, It's very important, although sometimes frustrating, to read his social media postings because they're confusing. But on Crimea, he spends an awful lot of time criticizing Ukraine and Obama. He says that Ukraine lost this under Obama, not me under Obama. And Ukraine, why didn't you even fire a shot in defense of this? You let the Russians take over, but you didn't defend it. Now you want us to back a war to reconquer it. This is Obama's fault. This is your fault. It's not my fault. I have to deal with the reality. And the reality is that Russia owns Crimea, and it is Russian, and it's going to be Russian. You're never going to get it back. See, he can say these things because it deflects all responsibility off of him. And that's the important thing. That's why he's singularly focused on Crimea, because his hands aren't dirty. But if Trump turns around and gives up Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, then the fault is with him. It's Trump that's done the giveaway. It's Trump that gave it up with a single shot. And so Trump is creating this alternative reality of trying to blame everybody else but him, trying to create a peace where he is with no fault, etc. And it doesn't matter that Witkoff keeps coming back to him going, hey, boss, the Russians are saying they, all of those territories belong to them, and they're not giving them back constitutionally, impossible. We're going to have to give it to them. Crimea, boss, I'm trying to tell you, there's 4 other territories there. Crimea. Trump only hears what he wants to hear. He only says what he wants to say. And this is why ultimately these negotiations will fail, because Trump isn't willing to take a leadership position. It would be the easiest thing in the world, literally, to get Europe to fold and get Ukraine to fold. Ukraine would be more difficult because there are some hardliners in there. I think, to be honest, it's a death sentence for Zelensky if he accepts anything that Trump is trying to put in. But Zelensky had a death penalty on his head for a long time now for what he's done. Ultimately, Ukraine isn't going to survive this conflict. There's no scenario under which Ukraine does survive this conflict. And so you would have to get Europe basically to say.
Okay, I sort of disagree with that. Okay, I like the position that Putin wants to have a Ukraine. He wants to have a Ukraine that's certainly neutral, demilitarized, and denazified, but he doesn't really want the western provinces of Ukraine. He doesn't want to have to rule them because Russia isn't really popular there. And it would be very difficult, therefore, to rule them. So he wants a Ukrainian state that's going to be neutral, that isn't going to be a threat to Russia. It's not going to have any Nazis in it. He wants that state, to be a buffer state, but he doesn't want to take over the whole of Ukraine. I think a lot of people, lots of observers, feel that way and would disagree with Scott, on this point. So therefore, Ukraine, in some fashion, will be able to survive, but it will be because of what Putin wants. Won't be because of the will of the Ukrainians. I think the Russians will end up taking the oblasts that they want to take, not only the 4 that they've already primarily taken, but at least another 4 or 5, of the oblasts. The ones that were mentioned earlier by Larry Johnson are going to be occupied by the Russians over this summer, and probably the Russians will take some of them. especially the Kharkov, and also Dnipropetrovsk. And to that, what they're going to want to add, okay, is Mykolaiv, okay, and Odessa. And I think they'll take those 4 more. And they'll probably trade back to the Ukraine's Sumy, in one of the other oblasts, that was mentioned by Larry, whose name escapes me, okay, at this point. So there'll be some trading of territory which the Russians, will have occupied by the end of the summer. And then there'll be the western provinces of Ukraine, which are going to stay, with the Ukrainians. Whether the Ukrainians will have an outlet to the sea or not, I don't know. That depends on whether the Russians want to share the port of Odessa with them in some way. That's going to depend on what Putin wants, okay, and Lavrov wants. And most especially on what Putin wants. Going further.
Ukraine's done. Yield it to Russia. It's a Russian problem. Let the Russians solve this problem. And American leadership could do that, because what we would have to do is convince Europe that we draw the line at Ukraine, that there will be no other, Russian adventures. Russia will not be going into Moldova. Russia will not be threatening the Baltic states. We could make these states, because Russia doesn't want to threaten these stations. This is an easy posture for the United States to take, because it literally costs us nothing. And it goes hand in glove with our attempt to better relations. But we're not doing that. We've allowed the Europeans to attach value to Ukraine, psychological value, moral value, economic value that simply doesn't exist.
That's a very good observation by Scott. Trump has allowed that to happen. When if he came in aggressively at the start and withdrew all support from Ukraine at that point, he would have been in a very good position to force the Europeans to pretty much stay out of it and allow the Russians, okay, and the United States to make an overarching security framework agreement from which the status of Ukraine would then fall out. So Trump did make a big mistake by not coming in and divesting himself of our intervention in Ukraine over the first 2 days or so.
Ukraine is literally the pit that you throw money into and it just keeps, you can't fix. Good American leadership could get Europe to walk away from Ukraine, and America could shoulder the blame. It's easy to do, because that one, all Trump has to do is say, nah, this is Obama and Biden's fault. And he has a MAGA base here in America that would accept that. But he's not willing to do that. He does, because his team is split and he has this pro-European team. He needs to either fire or absorb, convince the European team to, unify with the Trump team. If he could get Europe to back away from Ukraine, then this conflict will end. It means the end of Ukraine. I can't come up with a single scenario.
Okay. I think that may be easier than what Scott is saying, because Putin can refuse to make it the end of an independent state, of Ukraine. He could allow a rump state to continue to exist, and that would give something to the Ukrainians and also give something to the Trump administration. Oh, we saved, there's at least some state of Ukraine still left. We didn't completely fold, to the Russians, okay, what they wanted. That would be something that Trump would be able to salvage if he played his cards right.
Where a sovereign Ukraine state emerges from this conflict. Russia simply won't allow it to happen.
It is interesting with Trump.
So I'd like to have the opportunity to talk that over with Scott and find out why he thinks the idea of having a rump state of Ukraine is not something that Putin is going to go for. Because I think that is something that Putin is going to go for.
Trump, though, when the stock markets goes down, it's Biden's economy. When it goes back up, it's Trump economy. It's yeah, he does.
It's a nice world he's created for himself.
Yeah, it's very comfortable, and there's no responsibility there. But well, when you look at the Europeans, though, they don't seem to, well, so far accept much at all. They keep saying they want an unconditional ceasefire, which appears to be code for let's not talk about political settlement. They're talking about European peacekeepers, although they seem to recognize they can't scrape together more than 25,000. But I think for many of them, they're looking at this whole thing and wondering, well, what is Trump actually going to do? Is he going to walk away or not? Because he's not walking away. We can just continue to drag this on. But is there any other way that Trump can get some cooperation from the Europeans to end the war besides threatening? And I guess he will have to actually walk away from the war as well.
I think, again, this is where American leadership comes in. I can't speak for Donald Trump, and I can't claim to know what's going on behind closed doors. I believe that there is a desire on the part of the Trump administration to disentangle the United States from this European nightmare, because it is a nightmare. Europe is an absolute nightmare. I apologize. I know you're part of Europe, but I struggle to see the viability of the European Union experiment. I see Europe fracturing on so many different fault lines. I don't see, continuity of purpose, and I also don't see Europe being able to have a single vision on not just economic issues but military issues. How to create this? The only thing that allows Europe to speak cohesively militarily is NATO. And NATO can only exist if the United States is a willing and meaningful party to NATO. So Trump is talking about disentangling himself from this, but if you don't want to divorce completely from Europe, even though that might be attractive to people like me, it's not a realistic policy. We're not going to divorce ourselves from Europe. There's too much history there. There's too much economic alignment. And frankly speaking, the United States still has very much a European heart, meaning that.
Okay, I very much agree, Peter, with Scott about that. So even though it may not be the wisest thing to do, probably will continue to act as a backstop, okay, for Europe. As long as we're not an aggressive sort of backstop, as long as NATO is no longer an aggressive entity, I think the Russians can live with that.
That we, as a land of immigrants, we still derive most of our cultural and ethnic and historic links to the European continent. So we're not going to divorce from Europe. So I think Trump needs to be very clear about how he sees America's role in Europe going forward. What I would say is, if I were advising them, is that we need to assure the Europeans that we are not going to leave NATO, that NATO will continue to exist and America will continue to be the strategic backstop for Europe.
I think he could have added, and if we want to do that, there's another thing we have to do, and that is to remove those tariffs that we just placed on the EU, okay, and Europe, because those are devastating if we want to be allies with Europe, even in terms of simply providing a backstop, over the long run. We cannot afford to take hostile actions of that kind. I remind people of the paper I wrote and I gave on my broadcast, what was it, 3 or 4 programs ago. It was a paper on the tariffs, itself. and it took the position that the tariffs were absolutely the wrong thing to do, and the United States should only have used subsidies to try to establish strong industries here and to compete, on the basis of those very strong industries here. But we shouldn't have gone with tariffs, at all. Tariffs are always a source, of conflict, and they don't add anything positive to the international system. And anyway, I still hold, that particular view. I pointed out also a very, very important thing, that in international trade, it shouldn't be about balancing the funds or the exchange of funds, on a nation by nation basis. We have to remember that the funds which are exchanged in U.S. trade with other nations are always dollars. They are the funds that, as the currency issuer, we issue. Therefore, if the balance of our trade is negative, with respect to other nations in terms of U.S. dollars, that is not a problem for us to fix. What we're getting in return for those U.S. dollars from other countries, is real wealth. And if the other countries are willing to do that for us, then we ought to simply gracefully accept that. Insofar as the balance of trade produces a leakage of funds from our economy, I pointed out that the federal government can always take up the slack and produce new USD for the internal economy here in the United States. That is never a problem that we cannot solve if we have the will to do it. So I'll go on now.
But that NATO will become an exclusively defensive organization, that the day of trying to project NATO power into the Pacific, into North Africa, into the Middle East is over.
That is extremely important, that statement that Scott just had made. That's the key to the whole thing. In the 1990s, the mistake we made was when the Soviet Union collapsed, the original rationale for NATO was gone. So we weren't satisfied with that. We wanted NATO to continue. So to continue, we created a new rationale, but the new rationale was based on the aggressive idea that we needed to be defended against a Russia that was weakened and prostrate. And it was based on the idea that we had to do what we could to prevent that Russia from ever rising again to become a world power. Now, that particular objective has now failed. And the Ukraine war, and its results only exhibits how it has failed. And so we should be acknowledging that mistake we made way back, in the 1990s. We should have taken the other path then, the path of collaboration with Russia and inclusion of Russia inside of the EU, and NATO itself, if NATO was to be. But actually, NATO should have been expanded then as a military organization. Russia should have been included inside of the EU, at that time. And we would have had a friendly and a European facing Russia. That would have been much better for Europe, much better for Russia, and much better for us. We can't turn the clock back to the 1990s, but what we can do now is what Scott is suggesting. We can return NATO to a purely defensive organization And if for some reason Russia wants to join that organization, we should welcome them with open arms. I don't think they're ever going to want to do that now because they're immersed in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS. But at the same time, we can ease their sense of insecurity by making NATO a purely defensive organization and insisting on that particular defensiveness, removing any possibility that NATO will intervene in West Asia any longer, out of West Asia, certainly out of the Far East, certainly out of everywhere except for Europe itself, and certainly nothing but a purely defensive organization, as Scott says.
NATO must be 100% defensive oriented, and that the defense that we build must be, shaped in accordance with the reality of the threat. And since the United States is the NATO leader, since we are your backstop, we are making peace with Russia, so NATO must size itself accordingly. You are not at war with Russia. You are not to prepare for war against Russia. Your military should not be designed to defeat Russia on the battlefield. That's it. We will make you professional. We will sharpen things up. We'll improve. You guys will be cutting edge. And if anybody attacks you, you'll be able to defend yourself. But the day of NATO defining itself as a bulwark against Russian expansion must end.
Okay, I'm not sure that we can ensure that NATO, is cutting edge. And the reason why I'm not sure about that is because I'm not sure that the United States is cutting edge itself any longer. So I'm not sure we can guarantee that NATO is going to be cutting edge. But I understand this sentiment that Scott is advancing here. And certainly I agree that, we should make the defensive organization of NATO as cutting edge as we ourselves are, so they really are able to defend Europe, against all comers. Now, I don't think that's going to put too much of a burden on them, because I think the Russians, in the case of peace with Europe, they're going to turn towards Asia, because that's where all of the prosperity is to be gained, all the money, is to be gained, all the success, is to be gained. And Europe won't have to worry about Russia actually attacking them. What Europe's worried would be is, can they get a piece of the action of the great growth in the economies, of Asia? Can they collaborate with Asia on that also? Or will this very destructive period of history doom them to being apart from the great events that are happening in most of the continent, of Eurasia? Can Europe participate in the great advances that are being made of Eurasia right now? Can the United States participate in the great advances that are being made in Eurasia right now? Those are big questions, but they imply that any continued existence of NATO will be purely defensive.
If you're not willing to accept this, we're done with you. And if we leave you in its entirety. It will be all upon you, and you can't afford to do this. You don't have the economic capacity. You don't have the unified vision. You will fail. So it's your choice. If you want us to do this leadership position, you must divorce yourself from Ukraine. That is finished. And then I would also tell the European Union, you need to stop this trend towards European autocracy. You have to allow nations to express themselves democratically. And if Hungary decides that it has a certain aspect of sovereignty, that must be respected. If Romania decides, that must be respected. But the day of the European Union going in and interfering with the domestic internal politics of its constituent members must end, because the United States will not tolerate this. And the reason why I would insist on doing this isn't because the United States believes in democracy, because we know the United States doesn't believe in democracy. It's a mechanism of control. Because if we're going to maintain this level of military involvement, we have to ensure that Europe never gets us inadvertently into another conflict. Because the strategic goal isn't to double down on Europe, it's to disentangle from Europe. So if we're to stay in NATO, we have to make sure that we have the political ability to keep Europe from becoming a monster. And you can only do that by encouraging individual nations to express their sovereign rights and prevent Europe from coming together as a singularity.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. What Scott is basically saying is, if you want to stop Europe, from being a monster, you must. One way of doing that is to make sure, they are politically divided, because then the constituent nations of Europe are too weak, as individual nations, to become a monster. And you see that Glenn is reacting very favorably to that and is smiling at such a solution. He's not at all opposed to the idea that Europe should stay as individual nations. I also have to point out that there are advantages to that as well from a monetary sovereignty point of view. One thing that happened when the nations of Europe joined the EU, they gave up their monetary sovereignty so they could take on the EU currency, the euro. And as a result of that, the individual nations have not been able to adjust to business cycles. And there was suffering in many of the nations of Europe in the face of the crash of 2008. Terrible suffering in Greece, terrible suffering in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal, in all the nations, that were known as the Pigs nations, because they could not run financial deficits that exceeded 3%. And they needed to do so to respond to the economic crash of those years. And so the only way through the crash was for the Pigs nations to practice austerity, which involved considerable suffering from their people. That was created because of the necessity to give up their individual currencies. Things were very bad for Italy also, because they did that when they were doing just fine, with their individual currency. If they had continued to stay outside of the EU, they would have been far more prosperous in the years from 1996 through 2013 than they were. So there it is. There is an advantage for the European nations in staying as individual nations, not only cultural advantages, but there are economic advantages, as well. And also, if that happens, then Europe is not going to become a monster. And that's, I think, very important. In other words, Scott, he's very sensitive to the possibility of the rise of Nazis again, inside of Europe. Scott is very, very opposed to Nazism and the possible consequences of it. And you see that fear of Nazism reflected in his suggestion, that the nations of Europe become democracies and stay divided so that there can be no more rise of Nazi monsters inside of Europe.
But Trump, he seems to be on that track, though. He takes a very negative view of the European Union. I guess Elon Musk even more vocal in his disdain for that bloc. But you mentioned earlier the Ukraine. The Zelensky might, not be able to pull off a deal without being, I guess, killed. I guess it's a reference to the nationalists because, again, they've had tremendous power since 2014. But is there any other obstacles? I mean, with the legal issues, there might be problems. Of course, Zelensky opposing everything. You have, who do you talk to? I mean, this is going to be very difficult for any Ukrainian to accept. Do you see it as any possibility of any deal being made, or do they have, or will they first come to the negotiation table once the collapse have begun, when they lose control over their armed forces? How do you? Because I just can't see the nationalists being willing to negotiate on anything. I mean, they're very determined.
Well, I mean, I think in late 1944, early 1945, there were a large number of SS formations in the German military, a lot of Nazi paramilitary entities, party loyalists who were saying, we will never surrender. And yet in May, they had been defeated. I don't mean to be too harsh here, but if you're a Ukrainian nationalist, your future is grim. And you need to be told this. You're going to die. You either die on the battlefield or you'll be executed for the crimes you have committed. There is no sympathy here. You don't get a second chance. If you haven't committed crimes worthy of the death penalty, you are going to be arrested, prosecuted, and you're going to spend a hell of a lot of time in jail. And if your crimes aren't that much, we can rehabilitate you and try to reintegrate you into lower elements of society, but you will never be in a power position. This is your fate. And we have to that's what denazification is. And this is what the Russians are saying to me and to other people. This is the harsh reality. So the nationalists can posture all they want. They're going to die. Just like the Nazis died. Or they can go into diaspora. Maybe the West will be a willing recipient for a fifth wave of Ukrainian immigration, where we can bring all the Nazis over here and let them go to summer camp down here in Ellenville, and they can get government funded sinecures, etc., whatever. But within
Scott lives actually very close to Ellenville, which has been a center of the Banderite movement here in the United States. That's a neo-Nazi movement which has flourished in that small town, which has a park with statues in it dedicated to Bandera and other Nazis of the Second World War. Scott lives something like 25 or 30 miles away from Ellenville. And he lives in a suburb, of Albany, New York. So he's very aware of what is going on there. And he really dislikes those people quite intensely. I have to say, I have the same feelings about them as he has. I've actually been aware of their presence since the time I spent at Cornell in the middle to late part of the 1950s.
in Ukraine, they're dead. That's the reality. I don't know why people are pretending otherwise. The Waffen SS talked big up until when they were dead, when they were defeated. And Russia is on track to defeating these nationalists on the battlefield. But part of the denazification process, which Russia is not walking away from, is constitutional changes in the government. The government will be replaced. Zelensky is not the future of Ukraine. And governments sympathetic to Zelensky aren't the future of Ukraine. If you have ever taken a photograph smiling with Stepan Bandera's portrait on the wall behind you, you will not be part of the political future of Ukraine. Yes, I'm speaking to you, General Zaluzhny, you Ukrainian nationalist son of a bitch. and all of the other guys out there who've embraced this odious ideology. And I apologize for swearing, but I have no sympathy for these people. None whatsoever. There's nothing attractive about their ideology. There's nothing that can be misconstrued about what they're trying to do. These are hate-filled ultranationalists. These are white supremacists who view anybody outside of their little, specifically defined clique as subhumans. You know what they say about the Russians, what they call the Russians, and how they treat the Russians. The Poles know how they treat the Poles. The Gypsies know how they treat the Gypsies. The Jews should know how they treat the Jews. And yet we're supposed to express sympathy for these people. We're supposed to say, well, we must find a place for them. Their place is under the ground or in prison or in exile. But their future is not part of Ukraine. And I can't speak for the Russian government, but I've been listening to Russian government officials speak, and I believe that what I'm saying is reflective of the reality of the policies they're planning in a post-conflict Ukraine. They will not allow the scourge of Nazi ideology manifested in the form of Stepan Bandera's odious take on life to continue to exist.
Well, Scott told us what he really thinks. I share his views.
Yeah, no, I've been hearing similar things, so it's you're probably on track there. I wanted to switch gears a little bit towards the Middle East, because of course there's negotiations being had there as well. Well, I guess a very broad question is: do you think the genocide in Gaza can be stopped, or it's? I guess I'm not sure how one would assess this. Is the Trump putting any weight or leaning on Netanyahu, or do you see none of this being possible, or do you see the any realities on the ground compelling the Israelis to stop the killing?
Of course, the genocide can stop. It takes one phone call from the President of the United States to make the genocide stop. And we proved that in the past. Steve Witkoff's initial visit to the region resulted in a ceasefire because the president wanted a ceasefire, even though Netanyahu didn't want a ceasefire. We imposed it on them. But the president has to live in a world defined by reality. And I'm not happy about what I'm about to say, but it's the truth. The pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist lobby exercises unprecedented amounts of political influence and control here in the United States. So much so that it's almost impossible to get elected. It's impossible to get elected to senior office if you don't take a pro-Israeli stance. This president, in campaigning, took a very pro-Israeli stance, and this president has surrounded himself with probably the most pro-Israeli cabinet and and subordinate officials, more so than any other president in modern history, more so than even Joe Biden, who called himself a Zionist. So this is a reality the president has to deal with. Now, how do you deal with this reality? And this is where it gets sad, because we don't care about the Palestinian people. We being the United States collective. Yes, we have people in the United States, including myself, who do care about the Palestinian people. We have protesters out there doing heroic work because they are paying a heavy price. We have people less heroic, like myself, who don't participate in the protest because I don't want to get arrested. And but I write and I get shut down and I get attacked and I get, it's not easy taking a stance in support of Palestine. And a stance against Israel. But even despite all that, we're not moving the needle at all because nothing we're doing is impacting Donald Trump. So now the reality is Trump doesn't care about the Palestinians. He's willing to sacrifice them in support of a larger policy objective. Trump just like he needs to disentangle himself from Europe, needs to disentangle himself from the Middle East. We cannot get bogged down in these decades-long wars that cost us trillions of dollars and divert significant economic, military, and political resources to a region. His number one focus is China. And he needs to create a world scenario that allows him to singularly focus on China without the threat of something destabilizing to happen. This is why he's going to abandon the Ukraine conflict from hell or high water. We're not staying involved in Ukraine because our focus is China and Ukraine is a distraction. And this is why he's going to try to negotiate a peace, an agreement, a nuclear agreement with Iran, so that we can, it'll be an agreement that doesn't have clauses which create the potential for conflict down the road. This will be a final agreement. This will be the agreement that gives Iran the ability to have a nuclear enrichment program inspected, but the prospect of military action is going to be taken off the table because we don't want to go to war with Iran. Israel does. So when you say, can Trump say no to Netanyahu? Yes, he can. But politically, he has to have a pressure relief valve that compensates for the angst that peace with Iran is going to cause. And that pressure relief valve is Gaza. And he is going to give Israel the green light to do whatever the hell they want to do in Gaza, to bomb Beirut, to maneuver into Syria. You can do all that because that doesn't require American military support. Iran requires a tremendous amount of military support, which we don't want to do. So I think we're going to make peace with Iran, tell Israel to get where it needs to be on Gaza, and then bring it into the fighting and get the Houthi to stop interdicting shipping, and then we leave and we go to the Pacific.
Okay. So I disagree a bit, on that. I don't disagree that that's what the U.S. will probably try to do. I think that Trump will probably try to do that. He will probably try to get around, the Zionists, make a peace, with the Iranians. But he won't be able to get the Iranians to agree to stop supporting the Houthis, stop supporting Hezbollah, stop supporting the resistance groups in other countries, in the Middle East. Now, Iran is very strong. They have not responded yet with True Promise 3, even though I noticed something on YouTube today saying that they started to deliver on, True Promise 3. I think that particular YouTube is, I think it's not real. I think it's fake news. But the point is, an Iranian intervention in Israel with their missile forces, once the United States and Iran have concluded, an agreement, if Iran, then attacks Israel, in the appropriate way, and the existence of Israel is threatened, at that point, then I think the Israelis will replace the regime and will begin to be open to negotiating a solution that involves establishing a Palestinian state, that involves sharing the area from the river to the sea with the Palestinians. And of course, that would stop the genocide in Gaza. I do think Scott is right that Trump will not try to to put a stop to the genocide. But I think he is wrong in concluding that because we won't put a stop to the genocide, that the genocide cannot be stopped. I think a combination of the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese exerting influence in international politics and using force against the Israelis can stop the genocide before it's completed. So that's what I think of that particular possibility.
Specific. I think that's just strategic vision of Trump. But unfortunately, it means that the Palestinians are going to be sacrificed yet again. Yet again, we're going to say words about humanity that we don't mean. We are turning a blind eye to genocide. We are creating a situation in the United States where it's becoming illegal to criticize Israel. In the land of the free, the home of the brave, where free speech is supposed to reign supreme, it's now going to be illegal to speak out against Israel.
Of course, the Trump administration is trying to make it illegal. They're trying to lock up people in the United States for thought crimes at this point. I think they're trying to do that, and they're doing some damage. But I also think they won't, in the end, be successful. And if Trump continues to try, the chances of his impeachment and conviction will grow greater and greater over time. Okay, especially when you couple what he's doing there with his failures on the economic front and on the trade front.
This shows you, again, the control that the pro-Israeli lobby has on the United States.
Yeah, this is strange. Supporting genocide, okay, but protesting it, that's where the law comes down. But, well, my last question was if you think Netanyahu would permit peace with Iran, but I guess you answered this question.
He has no choice. He has no choice. He's not a shot caller here. Israel cannot attack Iran on its own volition. It doesn't have the military capacity to initiate and sustain meaningful military strikes against Iran. And given Iran's demonstrated conventional ballistic missile deterrence, Israel will pay perhaps a fatal price for initiating an attack against Iran that doesn't decapitate its leadership and eliminate the totality of its capabilities. And so if the United States isn't willing to align itself with Israel, there's nothing Netanyahu can do. There's nothing Netanyahu can do.
Well, Scott Ritter, thank you so much for your time. It's been very, very interesting. As there's so much, I guess Trump does it on purpose, the strategic ambiguity, which he implements into his negotiation tactics. So it's easy to get confused. So yeah, thank you again.
It keeps us employed. So
yeah, doesn't it?
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.
Thanks again.
Okay, so that's it for that particular video. Okay, I thought that Scott was probably at his best in that particular video. It was very wide-ranging in terms of the questions, and of course, it really begs for commentary. Okay, at this point. Have you anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add, We'll see how things come together, as time goes on. Things play out.
Yes. I was looking at some of the comments from the King of the Earth.
Mhm. But I tell you, Trump's got to do something quick. Get this over with. Dragging it out is, as was brought up, it just doesn't do well at all. I mean, like he said, it becomes Trump's war.
Oh, yes, I think it has become Trump's war, because he has delayed so long in stopping it. He's been the president since January 20th. It is now May 4th. It is Trump's war now.
Yeah.
He has made it his war because he didn't have the guts just to stop supporting it. Let nature take its course.
Right. And the thing is, all the stuff he yelled at Biden about, is he, stopping what he said he was going to stop? No wars, no wars, no wars. Well, and Witkoff is a perfect person that he has there. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, he could have had Witkoff stop it, but even before, he appointed Witkoff. I mean, he didn't have Witkoff on January 21st, January 22nd, but he could have stopped it himself.
yes.
He just had to write, an executive order discontinuing all assistance of any kind, okay, to Ukraine. But he was afraid of being charged, by the Zionist lobby of losing Ukraine, that wonderful, freedom-loving and democratic country,
Oh, God.
and he was unwilling to fight that particular battle. So that was another instance where lack of intelligence and lack of courage, really made the situation much worse. Evelina says, I know Witkoff is a negotiator, but who was responsible for drafting the framework? Was that uh, Kellogg? The answer to that question is they've not arrived at a framework yet. Now, Kellogg, uh, uh, I don't think Kellogg had a framework for creating security. He had a framework, for developing a ceasefire to freeze the war. But that framework is one that was rejected from day one by Russia. Even before day one, we knew the Russians were going to reject that because of all the statements that Putin had made. So therefore, the kind of agreement that Kellogg was looking for was impossible from day one. And in seeking that kind of agreement, he actually betrayed Trump. He went against the objectives of Trump.
Mm.
Trump kind of let him do that because he was trying to pretend. He was trying to avoid responsibility for losing Ukraine. He just had to make the choice from day one, but he couldn't make it. He avoided making it. Even as of today, he is still not making the choice. He's talking to Russia. He's obviously trying to get somewhere, but he doesn't have the strength to make the decisions that will get him to where he wants to go. And I think that's the truth of the matter. John B says, gotta go by all MFPS. I have no idea who that is. Says, hi, Pumpkin. Well, and MFPS says, like, subscribe, donate, and join the membership. Yes, please do donate. What you need to know for donation is on the screen. Okay, and D, will you give your information with respect to donation, please?
It's Venmo at Dolores Venmo Dolores Piers, and I have PayPal Dolores Piers and Cash App Dolores Piers. Peers.
Okay, thank you, Dolores. There are a few more comments. Eve Lima says Professor Mearsheimer on the Duran show said Trump blew it, only two options left. One, Trump continues to send military aid to Ukraine, or Trump gets out completely. Yeah, I completely agree with John Mearsheimer about that. And the Shoba has come around and says, hey, the Shoba. And the Shoba Shomak Shuti. Evelyn says, will Trump go the Biden way? I don't think so. I don't think he's going to go the Biden way. I think he's going to go the way Trump, that Scott suggested. He will keep at it until peace is made with Putin. And I think that he will avoid the war in Iran. I think there are people who agree with me on both of those things. I don't think Larry Johnson agrees with me on this. I think he still thinks that the odds are that, there's going to be a war with Iran. But I think that not only Scott, as he expressed here, but Ray McGovern, I think, also agrees with me that in the end, Trump will find his way to come to a peace agreement with respect to the Iranians. Evelina says, good video for sure. Well, thank you very much, Evelina. Okay, I know I'm biased, but I thought it was a good video too. So I think it's time to say goodnight. I will be back on Tuesday.
All righty.
I wasn't able to have a video on Saturday, as you know. So this video was a substitute for Saturday's video. So I will be back on Tuesday, at 9 p.m.
Sounds good. Good night, everyone. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, thank you for coming, Dee. I very much appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, and you're welcome.
Okay, good night to you.
Good night.
And good night to everybody. That's it for tonight.